Alright folks, welcome. We're doing something a little bit different this time. See, what we're going to do is, since I've been working with Doscord Bot Maker to just sort of get used to the program, see what I can do with it, I've been hitting a lot of tutorials up, and generally speaking, had a lot of trouble just trying to get stuff to work. And so, are we online? No, it's still sending data to Twitch. Why is it not? Whatever, OBS. You do you. You do you. So, yes. Before we go live properly with the description and the tutorial, let me make sure everything is broadcasting where it's supposed to be broadcasting. Broadcasting where it's supposed to be broadcasting. Alright, I think we're good. I got my second screen up and running. I can see things are running the way they're supposed to be running. Mute that. Move that over to there. Alright, so let's cover the first basics. What is Json? Json is a sort of data tool. It's sort of like an SQL database, but it's well, you can upload a JSON file, a single JSON file, as opposed to an SQL file. They're functionally similar. You know, there's definitely differences between the two, but let's just dive right in. As you can see here, I've got my JSON file set up. It's got 8 entries, and if we expand one, which at least on my browsers I can just do directly without any plugins, you can see what it contains. It's got several different fields. A lot of them are numbers because it's, you know, for a character creator system. And let's go and open up, say, one, which actually has some proper data. Again, with at least what I'm working with is, well, Firefox, you can see there's a lot of built-in functionality. Like, if you have a link in there, it'll give you a direct link. I can just open it up. You can see the numbers are in here. They're pretty standard numbers. You can see I can expand multi-line stuffed out. You know, it's, like I said, it's very similar to a database. It's a way of aggregating your data, essentially. So let's look at what we can do with bots, shall we? With the Doscord Bot Maker. We're going to go with the first thing I created, which is the hero card. So let's pop open discard. and I'll walk you through the process so you understand how you can do mixed files and what not, and then some. This is our hero card. And the way I set it up, I also use random numbers so you can pull up random characters. So if I were to do hero again, it probably won't pull up Divasmal again. Nope, pulled up Andrew Corbin. But you can also specify the particular entry in the database you want to pull up. So let's do 01. 01. 01. And this is a complete and individual single file. If you were to go onto my Discord and pull this up and do a save image as, even though this is made of a bunch of different layered images, it's outputted as a single, fully realized single layer image. So this is all one file. This is not multiple layers. This is all just a single JPEG. But each element in here is a separate element pulled from the database, aggregated on top. It's an entire process. But if you were to if you wanted to save this and use it later on, you could just save it, and it wouldn't be blank or anything. It would be completely intact. So with that said, we've got our card here. Let's go over to Doscord Bot Maker. Now, the first thing we want to do when pulling up our bot, making our bot, is we want to set parameters. Because what we want to do is be able to say, okay, what character do I want to pull up the data card for? So you can see here the command name is hero, and I've gone with the very first command to store command parameters. And if we pop that open, you see here, one parameter, you can do one parameter, multiple, mentioned members, mentioned roles, so on and so forth. You can do parameter number, and this is essentially its position, and it's being stored into a temp variable, so I can reference it later. So, like for example, if I go over here and we're just type in hero 1 2 B5, the only number that it cares about is that first number, because that first number is that parameter that we call. No other numbers are relevant because we're only checking for that one number. Now you can check for multiple parameters, and we'll see that in a later file that we talk about. Now we've got the variable, but what happens, as you saw before, if I don't put in a number? I should probably also check to see what happens if you put in a number that exceeds the range, but I actually hadn't thought about that until just now. Anyway, if you don't put a number in, this is where this thing comes in. This is a check variable. And we're basically saying, okay, we're looking at the variable that we defined as temp variable number. We want to see if it exists. So, did I put a number in there? If I didn't put a number in there, it does not exist. If it does not exist, continue the actions. If it does exist, skip one action. So you can see here, if it does not exist, we go immediately to here. And then when this completes, we move on to here. But if it does exist, we skip this and move immediately to here. So generate random number, pretty simple. We're telling it the range. And the range in this case is something I put in manually, because if we pull up there we go. It has to read through the entire database. It gives it a moment. So you can see here with the list, we have got 8 entries in this list, starting from 0, going to 8. And so that's why I chose, when I did the check random, generate random number, I'm generating a random number between 0 and 8, because that is the range that we have for our JSON database. So we're picking one of those 8 numbers. As you can kind of see here, whatever number it picks up is going to be which character it loads. So let's move on to the next one. We're saying, all right. So we want to grab the JSON file. It's located at this link. That's a JSON file. We want to load it in. And this is, I'm not using any web API, sorry, I'm not using any complex API on top of it. I'm just going, here is the exact direct link to the JSON file, to the raw data. Go here. Now, we could just stop right there and not have to fill anything else out here. The problem is that if we were to do that, it would pull everything, which, granted, can have its benefits. When we actually go into the list, you'll see I'm actually pulling the entire thing. But then we'd have to find some way of looping through the different entries. So we have to find a way of looping through 1, through 2, through 3, and so on and so forth. And I do it manually for this list because it just worked best for that particular method. But in this particular case, since we're telling it, it only needs to check one entry in the entire database, whether it be 0, 1, 5, 8, whatever number we're looking for. I specify here that in the JSON path, we're going to look for, we need a $sign to lead things off, and then we need brackets to specify the variable that we've created, the temp variables, and that's what all this is. Because if you go over here, for example, and do insert temporary variable, you'll see number, and it creates that exact same string right like that. So that is the string we need to get to use the actual number that we've input. And remember, if we didn't put in a valid number, we're using generate random number to assign a valid number to number. All right. So now we're starting to get into a little bit more of the design elements. This very first thing here is how I set the scale, the width of these things. Because originally I had these things set at half scale because I wanted to make sure that the stats could go up to 10. But the truth of the matter is, even in Aberrant, in most cases, most characters are not going to have stats that are going beyond 5. Now, if they have stats that go beyond 5, they're supposed to be considered rare characters, not common characters. So if you have a in-universe ID card specifying, how strong a character is, it's not going to use a 10 scale. It's going to use a 5 scale. So the 5 scale I came up with is that basically each notch on the scale, each fifth, each 20%, however you want to think about it, has a width of 16. And when you multiply that by 5, you get the total length of this particular bar. And that took a lot of trial and error and back and forth to try and find the exact right number I wanted for my particular background here, because it all scales with the size of the background. So in the end, after a lot of trial and error, I found that 16 was the ideal number for me for my scale measurement. You and your own images and your own layers and your own whatnot will probably see scales, but it'll work differently. All right, so now we have the trick. Now we need to start building our layers. So there are a few things we're going to do here. And technically you could do these in different orders because it really what it gets down to is at the very end of the thing, you need to make sure that the image you're sending to the channel is going to be what's considered your background image, because everything's layered on top of the background image. You can kind of see here, temp variable to temp variable BG. So since you're sending the background image, you need to make sure that you establish early on where your background image is, but you don't necessarily, as you can see here, have to establish your background image as the first image that you draw. As you can see here, I'm doing a create image for the background image, but that's not actually the first thing I call. What I did was the first one I called is supers, the name of our JSON array, position 0, because it's always going to be position 0, in this particular JSON setup, dot image, which is the image link to whatever character we're calling up. Then I go and say, okay, this image, no matter what it is, no matter how it's designed, it needs to fit within a certain space. It needs to fit within this space, this block here. So again, a lot of trial and error, a lot of measurement, to try and figure out what that range was. And what I ultimately found was that the width is 310 pixels and the height was 300 pixels. Again, whatever your base image is going to determine how large your images needs to scale for. And this means that no matter what image I'm picking from, whether it be the template, whether it's the Batman, whether it's 01, whether it's Castius Pax, that image that is stored in the JSON database will always resize to 310 by 300. Again, as I mentioned here, I'm creating the background image because we're not layering anything yet. Now we're going to start layering things. So the first thing I layer onto the background, because that's what we're noting here first, source image. What is the base layer image? What are we layering everything onto? Background, BG. I made some custom fonts, but and I'll do a tutorial on how to make custom fonts in a later video. But you could leave it as a default font for now, because again, custom fonts are going to be their own thing. Max width, again, that's a matter of tinkering, because the max width is going to determine when it does a line break. So that's going to be you tinkering to figure out just how far do I want my text to roll before it line breaks. Because that's a thing you're going to discover a lot with doing image manipulation. There's going to be a lot of trial and error to find the perfect positioning. So, after again a lot of trial and error, I found out that 84 on the X position, that's our left to right axis, is the perfect spot to line up the title, the character name, with the ID box. And then I had to tinker around, figure out, okay, how far from the top, so it's just right above the box. And that turned out to be 84, 118. And this gives you some starting information to work with. You know that when you put your image in, it's going to be 84 on the X position, and it's probably going to be like 120, 124, something in that range. You know it has to be at 118, because 118 is where your title box is. So, again, and you're going to notice there's going to be a lot of repetition in here, because we're drawing a lot of things. So I'm not going to go through each one of these things, because each one of these things is a lot of repetition. It's a lot of the same thing. We only need to cover each element at once. But the first thing we're drawing after the name is we're drawing strength. And I mean literally the word strength. And that's a matter of finding the positioning, finding the horizontal and the vertical. So if we go over and look at the bot, after much tinkering, I discovered that in order to draw the word strength, at the top of the ID box, but outside of its range to the right, I need an X position of 400, and I discovered that 168 was pretty much where I put it in order for it to be where it is. Again, your width, your width's going to be up to you. These variables are going to change a lot depending on how you want things to lay out. But here's the key thing. You always want it. You're always going to be layering these things on the background, always. Because when you post this thing at the end of when everything is done, you're posting one item. You're posting the background. You are sending the background image. But since you've done all this image manipulation, you've done all of these overlays onto the image, just posting the one background image has created this complex, multi-layered image. So again, we drew strength. The next thing we do is we drew the strength bar, the red bar. Now let's see if I can get you some stuff to work with. Actually, maybe this will help. So here's the strength bar. If I were to just go like that, as you can see, that's where the red box comes from. So when we're scaling everything, and we're making the scale for the different sizes, that red box is this variable here. So I create an image, give it a variable name, strength bar. And obviously I have a dexterity bar, a stamina bar, perception bar, an intelligence bar, a wits bar, an appearance bar, charisma bar, and a manipulation bar. We don't need to go into each and every one of those, but I will go into giving you some more details here. Okay. So in order to specify how wide the strength bar is, I need 1, its size, which is going to be a number between 1 through 5, located inside of the database, inside of our Json database. So if strength is 5, then this means when it populates this data, it'll be 5 times the scale. Scale, of course, we specified before as a constant, 16. If we do 5 times 16, that gets us a full bar. But you can see here with perception is 4, so we get 4 times 16. And that gets us this red bar. As you can see here, manipulation I think is 1 times 16, so on and so forth. Now you're probably asking yourself about that little gray bar that's behind it. That is a separate image, as you might imagine. Which we actually specify here, if we scroll down. So one of the first things I do, before I start drawing the actual strength bar and the mega strength bar and all that, you'll notice the first thing I do in this entire huge block is to specify, onto the background image, I want to draw the bar background. I want to give it an X position of 490, Y position of 170. Your strength bar is going to be the exact same numbers because it's going to lay on top of it. So if you look at this, so we look at the bar background, the first use of it, it's 490 by 170. Look at the strength bar, 490 by 170. If we look at the mega strength bar, 490 by 190, because it's smaller, so it scales down a bit on the y-axis. And then we redraw the bar background because we only need to establish it once. We only need to create that image once. We don't need to create it for every instance. So even though this gray bar here is used multiple times, in fact, technically speaking, the gray bar is behind the strength bar because this is all done programmatically. So if someone has a lower than max strength, you'll see some gray bar behind it. But you'll notice every time before I start drawing these things, as they're being drawn as overlays on top of each other, that I draw the bar background first. Then I draw the red box, then I draw the green box. Then I do the gray box, the red box, the green box. Let's jump back up here. So we've established the strength. We've established drawing it and scaling it. The mega strength box is literally the exact same thing. It's pulling from the mega strength stat, multiplying it by the scale attribute. Now, here's where I ran into an instance where I had to throw in some conditional statements. Because with the Aberrant, the storyteller role-playing system, which I'm basing the entire stat system here on, your base stats will always be, at the bare minimum, 1. You can't have 0 strength, you can't have 0 intelligence. I mean, technically speaking, if you were to do a Vampire the Masquerade campaign and play a Nosferatu, you have an appearance of 0, so I should have an exception put in for appearance, but I haven't done that because it hasn't really been necessary. I'll probably do it at some point in the future because it's not that hard to do, to throw in a essentially a logic check. So what we're doing for our logic check to make sure that the game doesn't so that the program doesn't throw an error of some sort because it comes up with a 0 value or a null value, we're saying, okay, my strength bar, let's go through it piece by piece. We've created the strength bar. We've come up with its scale. We're using a run script for that, and we're assigning that into a temp variable called strength wide. We then use strength wide to draw to resize the. We already created the strength bar. We need to resize it, just like we resized the image to a standardized size. But what we're doing is we're throwing a variable into here, into its new width. So we're saying, okay, strength wide, which we just calculated, is going to be some number between 16 and what is it? What is 16 times 5? 50, and then let me throw 6 times 5, that's 30, so it's about 80, something like that. And the height, of course, is a constant because they're all going to have the same height. You can see it right there on the side that all the strength, whether it's strength, dexterity, stamina, perception, intelligence, wits, appearance, charisma, or manipulation, they're all the same height. So the height is standard, the width changes depending on our data from the Json. And the M strength bar, again, I'll show you it. That's our gradient of green that we use for the mega strength and all the other mega attributes. And then we just scale it as necessary. And we do the same thing with mega strength. We're going to specify that the mega strength is its mega strength value, which can be 0. You don't have to have mega attributes higher. You don't have to have a mega attribute minimum of 1. They can be 0, but this introduces a problem because if it's 0, the math gets weird. Because if it's 0 or null, then it doesn't know what to do with it. So we need to throw in an exception. So what we say is for the mega strength wide, we want to see if it exists. If it exists, skip the next action. If it doesn't exist, if it's a null value, we need to give it some value, some width, so that it can be displayed. And I went with the lowest possible number possible, 1. So if you actually look at all of these things like perception, intelligence, wits, appearance, charisma, manipulation, even though they have a mega value of 0, they have a width of 1, but the width of 1 is so tiny that it's imperceptible. So we draw it with a width of 1, which is so tiny and so imperceptible. Because remember, this little bar here for strength, mega strength 1, that's 16 units. That is 16 pixels. So imagine breaking that up into 16 individual pixels, and then using just one sliver of those pixels in here. Maybe, if you stare long enough and hard enough, with really good eyes, and you were to blow this up to full size, maybe you'd see the tiny single pixel down here. But it's good enough for my tastes, so I went with it. And of course, when we're specifying the mega attribute, we're specifying that, again, it has the mega strength wide, which we now have set a floor of 1 pixel. It can be 16 pixels if it's a mega strength of 1, or a mega, dexterity of 1, or it can be, whatever value it is. But it can never be lower than 1. And so we draw it. Not draw it. We specify its size. Because remember, none of this is actually drawing on the screen. We're giving it values before it draws, and that's a key thing you want to remember. Is that before you draw an image, you want to make sure that you have created the image, that you have resized the image, and then you can draw the image onto your background. Because if you don't do those, they can be any number of places on the image depending on all kinds of different factors. So you want to make sure you create the image, resize the image, then place the image. And then we repeat this process going forward with dexterity, with stamina, perception, intelligence, wits, appearance, charisma, manipulation. And as we can see here, this little box down here, I wasn't quite sure what I want to do with it. I'll probably do something like create random number generator, so it'll create a random expiration date. But for now, I just specified a hard and fast rule on what the expiration date was and drew that in. And that was, again, just like when we created the name, except that we weren't pulling from a database. I wrote it in manually. I said, okay, we're writing onto the background. Draw this text. You draw text on image. A temp variable for the background, BG. Gave it a nice large width just for safety purposes. Figured out its X and Y position through trial and error, and then just gave it straight up flat text and been like, everybody gets February 15th as their expiration date. I'll probably go back in later and customize that, giving it more functionality. Like, for example, let's be honest here. Would it make any sense for a hero ID for 01 to expire in 2018 when he doesn't become 01 until 2020? So the next thing we move on to is we're drawing powers. And the powers is just designed the same thing. It's got the same X offset as strength, dexterity, stamina. It just draws the word powers onto the screen. And then what we do is we go into our database and we say, all right, go to the powers section. That's down here. This is a string. It could be a very long string. We want you to draw that string onto our database, onto the screen, onto our image. And that's why, and again, this took a lot of trial and error, and I eventually found that 500 in this case was a good width in order for it to cover from here to here and do a natural break. Like, for example, let's pull up Divis Mall, where I believe it is ID 2. Hero 2. Divis Mall. There we go. So you can see when we draw Divis Mall on the screen, he has a lot of powers. So making sure you got that max width so that it cuts off at the right point, kind of key. Especially for guys who have a lot of powers. But conceptually, it's no different than everything else we've done. It's the same as drawing the name Divis Mall on the screen. It's the same as drawing the bashing and lethal soak. It's the same as drawing the strength. All we're doing is we're pulling the information from our JSON array. Now, here's where we start getting into some crazy stuff. Because I wanted to make sure that these cards were useful from a role-playing perspective as well as a role-player's perspective. This is an ID card that they might have in-universe, but it's also just a quick reference guide for the player. I decided to put their bashing, their lethal, and their aggravated soak, and the various modifiers for those on the card beneath the ID. Because you'll notice with the powers, I don't specify the levels of the powers in most cases. And a couple of these characters I actually did put their levels in, but if you actually look up Divis Mall in the player's guide, they don't actually give you exact numbers for them. Anyway. So I had to make some up. I think I did something like his invulnerability is 3? Or no, invulnerability is 2? No, his invulnerability is 3 because it's 18 down here. And he has armor, and armor gives +3. So he has like 3 armor and 3 invulnerability, something like that. So numbers I threw in to give him some hard numbers that could be used for the system. But here's where we started to have to throw in math. Because you can do math on this stuff. It is not impossible to do math. So this, obviously the simplest ones to do is just the bashing soak, because you know what the bashing soak is? We run the script to calculate the bashing soak. If you take a look here, it's their stamina plus their mega stamina. Because if you actually look at the Aberrant guide, your bashing soak is equal to your stamina plus your mega stamina. So if you have 5 mega stamina, you have 5 bashing soak. If you have 3 mega stamina, you have 3 bashing soak. If you have 3 regular stamina, you have 3 regular bashing soak. It's lethal and aggravated where things get complicated in terms of math. So I made a run script where I just said, grab me the number for stamina, grab me the number for meg stamina, add them together, throw it into a new variable. And I threw that variable together and I called it strength bash. And I said, draw text onto the screen, put it on the background, use this custom font. It doesn't need to be very wide because it's only going to be taking up about a third of the picture. And so I said, yeah, 100 should be fair. I tinkered with it a bit. Again, 84 is our magic number for getting it right underneath the picture, and then just figuring out its Y position was the hardest part. And then I basically just said, yeah, B, colon, and then I went and literally said, insert temporary variable. Temporary variable, stamina bash number. Now, I will mention one thing about this that can throw you off. That can throw off a lot of people, especially if you're trying to do variable math. It's not obvious at first, but when you're creating a script like this, and you're creating your temporary variable, and you're naming your temporary variable, these two fields here can be the difference between the code executing and not. Because sometimes it'll default to evaluate code directly, and it will not evaluate the code. So I have to switch it over to evaluate code first. So sometimes, if stuff doesn't work, try switching these two up. You may find that one or the other is the particular syntax needed in order to get your code to evaluate properly. But another thing you want to keep in mind, especially if you're working with numbers and trying to add numbers, you want to specify that the variable type you're doing is not the unknown type, which is what it will always default to. It'll always default when you set temporary variable and create your temporary variable, you name your temporary variable, it'll always default to unknown type. You want to set it to number because that's what you're working with, and that's what you're going to do math on, that's what you're going to do calculations on, the number. So you want to make sure the variable you're creating is defined as a number variable. But you can see here, you can do all kinds of stuff here. You can specify it as an emoji, a server, a role, a voice channel, text channel, a message, a member, an image, a string. But in this particular instance, we're doing numbers, we're doing math. We want to specify this is a number so that when we do calculations with it, there are no problems. And we're going to see that. So I have a field actually in my database, which you can kind of see down here. Bonus bashing, charge bashing. These are from the powers. Like, I figured out in my head what various bonuses that Divismal gets from his armor power, from his invulnerability power. And I threw them down here in the bonus field. For bonus, I basically set it up as 3 ways. Your bonus field is like the armor power itself. It's an activatable power that gives a certain amount of bonus defense. The charged bashing is, like for example in Divismal's case, he has the impervious super heavy armor. Well, if you activate super heavy armor, that costs an additional quantum point, and it gives you an additional point of defense. So that is what the charged bashing is. It's basically designed for powers that activate as a secondary effect to the main power. And that's where I did the charged bashing. As you can kind of see here, what I did here is I specified that for Divismal, his bonus bashing is this. And you see, this is not actually doing math. This is just doing straight up variable delivery. The plus is a string number, so that's visible on the screen. And then we're pulling the variable for bashing. We're doing the plus again, and we're pulling the variable for charge bashing. And that's how we get the +9, +3 here. And we see the same thing over on lethal and aggravated. And dice bashing, that's basically a string in and of itself, because like if you look at the invulnerability power, for example, the invulnerability power gives you +6 to bashing, lethal, and aggravated, but you have to specify what type of attack it is, whether it be kinetic attacks, fire attacks. If you have certain modifiers, you could say it's a broad range, like energy attacks. So as we can see here, with Divis Maul, he has invulnerability to physical and vulnerability to energy. So this is why we have +18 physical, +18 energy. And he also has the power force field, so I threw that into the dice bashing as well, because that's a calculation. And we figure out what the calculation is going to be. It's going to be quantum, which we haven't actually stored anywhere in there, so it's just set up as Q. But if I ever actually modify this so that actually the quantum numbers, the quantum values are inside of the actual JSON file, again, I can just go over to, let's see, where is it? Dice bashing. And I'll have to do a little bit more math to pull out stuff like Q and all that. And, you know, it's going to be an entire process because you have to interact with the database. But it's doable because you can manipulate any of the information you want as you need to. You can parse it as much as you want. This is a relatively simple system. So now we move on to lethal. And again, lethal, more complicated than bashing because lethal is basically half of your bashing value. If you actually look in the books, you'll see that with lethal, it's you start off with 0 lethal soak. But if you have a stamina greater than 1, that is, if you have stamina of 2, then you get 1 lethal soak. And if you get stamina 3, you get another lethal soak. And so on and so forth. So I have this entire long series of if statements that just slowly increments the lethal soak based upon their stamina and their mega stamina numbers. And that gives us our final lethal stat. We do the same thing that we did with the bonuses and the aggravated. And we just say, what are those extra numbers? 9 and 3, 9 and... and I only wrote out the actual dice one once because, well, it's pretty long, and I haven't found a way of simplifying it to be small enough to get all 3 of them to fit up in here. But then we move on to aggravated. Now, aggravated, you have no base soak for. That's why it's called aggravated. But like I said, there are certain powers that give you aggravated defenses. Like, for example, the impervious armor, an impervious force field. These things give you aggravated soak. So they get their bonus aggravated, their charged aggravated, their dice aggravated. So you can see here, when we go to aggravated, it's just a straight up flat 0 because you have no base aggravated soak. But we pull the bonus aggravated to see what it would be in this little field here. So we now know, we can take Divis Maul at a glance and be like, okay, he has a base 8. He's being attacked by a bashing attack. He has a base defense of 8. And we know that he can get, if he activates all of his powers simultaneously, he can get another 12 to that. And if it falls within the categories of physical or energy, you can throw another 18 on that. And his force field's up. You have to do some more calculations. But you can now see at a glance what all that relevant data is. And don't worry, when we get to the battle system, this extra data will be relevant to have. Because while the battle system can calculate things based upon your stamina, whether it be bashing or lethal, I don't actually have a system for dealing aggravated damage yet. But it'll look at your stamina and it'll do automatic calculations on stamina. But there is a built-in system to the combat system that allows you to augment those numbers with your own additional values. And we'll get to that when we get to that. So, we've dealt with the aggravated. The logo, not any more different than the stuff we've already done. We create the image, we resize the image, and then it's time to start drawing all these boxes in. And you can see here, it's just bar, master bar, bar, master bar, and bar, master bar, bar, and master bar. Then when we reach the end, I draw the image on here. I draw the logo up here. And I say, as the very last action, to send to the channel the hero data. And that's how I created the hero card. But that's only one aspect of it. That gives us a hero card, but what are we going to do with it? Unless we want to roll dice manually. And heaven forfend me roll dice manually. Should have brought a glass of water. So, then, what we need to do is figure out what type of attack we want to use. And I've created a bunch of attacks that I can just roll with a command. So we're going to go with one of the most basic ones. We're going to go with Bashing Brawl. One. Now we can see with Bashing Brawl is it does a bunch of calculations for us. It says you have 4 strength and you have a certain number of value in Brawl. With again, Brawl is something in the database. It says a certain amount of Mega Strength. You have no attack bonus. You have no bonuses to attack. There's no bonuses to defense. So it's just Strength plus Brawl plus Mega Strength, auto successes, versus Stamina and Mega Stamina. And as you can kind of see here in this little randomly generated one, Andrew Corbin deals 3 HP of damage to 0-1. So let's look at how that happens. How did we calculate all that fun stuff? Well, this one requires multiple parameters. Like I said before, you can do multiple parameters. So they all exist along the same system. I said, we're naming it Bashing Brawl. Basically the damage type plus the actual attack type. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the first parameter. We're going to say, if the first parameter doesn't exist, pick one at random. Otherwise, use that number. And this allows us to do something like Bashing Brawl 1, 2. Which allows us to set 0-1 against Divis Maul. Or we can just do Bashing Brawl 1, which allows you to set 0-1 against a random opponent. In this case, he fought himself. So let's go over how we got here, right? We want to cover all the basics. So, I'm not going to go over stuff that we've already covered. Because, I want to give you guys an idea of just like how you can do a bunch of stuff with Doscord Bot Maker. So we're basically doing the same things here. We're specifying the first parameter. We're saying if it exists, then use it. If it doesn't exist, roll a random number between 0 and 4. I could do 0 and 8 if I wanted to, because there's 8 characters. But for now, I just said 0 to 4, just so that there's a random number that it can work from. Second parameter is the opponent. Did the exact same thing. Look at the second parameter, and let's take a quick look at that. So you can see here. We're specifying one parameter. We're saying parameter number 2. That is the second value that we put in. And that allows us to specify the opponent. Again, either use a number or create one at random. Now, here is where we start getting into things a little bit more tricky. The third value is any bonus attack, successes that you have. And the fourth one is any bonus defensive one. So, like for example, if we're doing Divismal again, if we were going to throw up his defenses, this is where we would throw in the 9 plus 3 plus 18. So, for example, let's do that. Let's do bonus brawl 1, 2. We're going to say 0 bonus attack dice. But we know that Divismal can throw up a total of 9, 10, 11, 12, plus 10, so that's 22, so another 30 dice for his defenses. $38 defense. His base defense is 8. We threw out 30 from his different powers. As you can see here, no damage is dealt by Z01. And that's what the parameter number 3 and 4 are about. It's about giving us extra parameters. Now again, we can mix things up again. We can do 1, 2. Let's say that we've done some calculations off screen, and we know that 0-1's using a weapon, or he's got or he's rolled his mega dice or whatever, and he's come up with an additional 5 damage. And he's going up against Divismal, who's still got his 30 defenses up. Well, now, Z01, instead of dealing 10 damage, is dealing 15 damage. Still not enough to break through Divismal's defenses, but it's a better attempt. And that's what parameter 3 is about. That's your attack bonus. Now, unfortunately, when you're doing these variable checks here on one parameter and whatnot, you can specify it being a temporary variable, but you can't specify it being a number. You can't force it to be a number, which can cause some problems later on when we're doing the mathematic calculations, which is why I have this little control variable in here, which, well, that's a control variable. The conversion variable, which takes our attack bonus after it's gone through the basic checks of establishing either it exists or it doesn't exist, and if it doesn't exist, set it to 0 or whatever. And then we say, convert this number to an int. We can convert it to a float if we want, but int's just fine. We're working with integers anyway, so we might as well just convert it to an int. Saves in processing memory. And we have to store that into a new variable. You can't store it into the same variable, as I found. So I can't just store it back into attack bonus. I have to store it into something else. So I create attack bonus 2. And this is where we're going to do all our calculations on. If you look later on down here, you'll see attack bonus 2 is referenced. You'll see defense bonus 2 is referenced, but not attack bonus 1, because attack bonus 1 is an unknown type. So we've got our basic parameters. We've searched for and pulled up and stored our initial stats. We know that it's going to be who the attacker is, who the defender is, any bonus attack dice, and any bonus defense dice. Now, we need to pull up all their relevant statistics from the JSON, which means we do the store JSON from Web API again, but this time we're doing it twice. And as you can see here, what we're doing is we're storing it into a temp variable. Now, we stored it into a temp variable last time, but it wasn't really worth mentioning because we only called it once. So, but in this case, we're creating 2 different versions. One for the attacker, one for the defender. So there's going to be 2 different variables from the JSON. That means 2 different JSON arrays that we're going to be manipulating our data from. So we have one for the attacker, and we can see here I'm using the same syntax as before to pull parameter 1, and defender does the same thing, you just have to pull parameter 2. Then we start going through the basics here. Generating our background. Alright, so what is our background? That's our background. So when we draw everything onto that, that's our base background. And then we got to figure out, okay, how big do I want this to be? Because I've got to be able to throw everything onto this. So I decided, you know what? For the background, let's make it 25% of its normal size. Because it's a pretty large file. Pretty large reference file. So I'm going to say, let's work with it at a quarter size. Let's resize it to a quarter of its normal size. Because you can work with, percentages as well as flat numbers. And then we just start going through and pulling our images and our names and resizing just like we did before when we pulled the images and the names and the before. So it's literally the exact same process. I go attacker, create image, draw text on image for name, resize the attacker image, draw the attacker image on the background. You don't have to put it at the end. In this case, it made the most sense to draw it immediately, so I could do blocks of area. So we do the same thing for the defender, image, name, resize the image. Now, here's where I threw something else into here. In order to make it look like a proper versus screen, I threw in a rotate image onto the defender's image. And I specified here for it to be a horizontal mirror. Now I could have done a vertical mirror, a diagonal mirror. I could have rotated it, which I do with some of the other stuff. But I wanted them to face off against each other, so I gave it a horizontal mirror. This means that no matter who's in the second position, they will always have their image flipped, giving a proper face-off feel to it. And then we just go back through the same process all over again. I want to pull strength plus brawl from the database. Throw that into attacker dice. Technically, this is some older code, so you don't need to do this step because, again, I could have just specified attacker dice here. This is where I'm talking about a case of keeping an eye on your variables. See how it's specified as an unknown type? I could have just specified it as a number and been done with it and not have to do the conversion type. And I could go through here and remove all the conversion types, but then I'd have to go through and make sure that every time I reference attacker type is attacker type 1, not attacker type 2. So, but when you're doing it, keep in mind the specification of the variables, because it'll save you from having to do extra steps and creating extra variables, like in this case. So now here we are. We've got the attacker's dice. And what the attacker dice is, in this particular case, as we specified here, it's the strength plus brawl. Now, if you've played the Aberrant role-playing system, that's the number of dice you have to roll. So, about 10 dice maximum. And so, that's what we do here. We generate a random number. We're saying, generate random number, throw it into attacker dice, into attacker strength. We want its minimum range to be 1. We want its maximum range to be, the total number of dice, because we're rolling between 1 to 10 dice. And I could do more mathematics to this as well. I mean, technically speaking, what I should be doing is rolling 1d10 times the dice. And I could throw it in there if I wanted to be a little bit more accurate, but again, this is a more simplified system, and I'll probably keep tinkering with it. But this allows us to take those 10 dice and basically determine if our damage is going to be between 1 and 10. And again, you can throw other calculations into there. So you could do like, you could throw variables. We've discussed how you can throw variables into here. The heck, there's a variable in here. So what I could have done is before this, it could be something like, what would it be? It'd be, I have to do something crazy like a loop, where I would say something like, roll 1d10, roll a random number between 1 and 10, and add and roll another number between 1 and 10, another number between 1 and 10, another number between 1 and 10. Do that attacker dice number of times, and then check against a difficulty of 7. And, it's doable. It requires a lot more programming, but it's doable. So, now we're moving on. Now with Mega Strength, and only Mega Strength, mind you, you get 5 automatic successes per point of Mega Strength. So, we have taken our attack strength, which is the strength plus brawl, which is a variable number. We're adding our attack bonus, and then we're adding our automatic successes, and that determines our total number of successes on the attack total. So now we know what our total attack total is. In this case, for 0-1, it would be 15. And then we have to go over to Defender. This is Brawl. This is Brawling. So the numbers are pretty simple. We pull in the basic numbers. We check to make sure that, in this case, we just basically pull in the numbers. What is their stamina plus Mega Stamina? And that's our defense total. Convert it to a float because why the hell not? Again, this is older code. This is before I just started being like, you know what? Instead of it being an unknown type, it's a number. Screw you. But the thing we have to keep in mind is that if the attack isn't higher than the defense, you're not going to deal any damage. So how do we check that? That's why I did this. Alright. Damage output. We're going to check to see if the damage output is less than 1. Now, how do we calculate damage output? Let's go over here. This is how we calculate damage output. We take our defender total. We subtract the attacker total. That is our damage output. For damage output is less than 1. Then we want to set it to 0. As we can see here, it does 0 damage. It doesn't do plus damage. Your attack's not going to heal Divis Maul if you're too weak to hurt him. And then we just do some basic draw of variables here. Draw the attack text, we draw the defense text, we draw the damage output, and we send the entire full height image. And that's what we do brawling. Lethal, as I showed before with the lethal calculations on the hero card, is a little bit more complicated because we basically have to count lethal at certain thresholds, and we have to do that entire process in here inside of our damage calculator. So, yeah. Not the most fun thing in the world, but it's something you need to do when you're doing lethal calculations. But it'll give us the same thing. It looks exactly the same too, right? Same thing as well. If I just do lethal brawl 1, 2, you'll see. It's the same system. It just has more complexity on the defender side to calculate the defense numbers. And then I create a bunch of various variant attacks, but they're all following pretty much the same system. If we pull up Revolver Light, since the Revolver has a standardized damage, I don't have to do too terribly much with it. Like if we look at Revolver, it's actually a far more simplified version. We pull the first parameter, we pull the second parameter, and then then the third parameter is the defense parameter. It's not the attack parameter, because with the Revolver, it has a preset damage. So we do some damage rolls, we do some calculations against defense, and then pop out the results. And then lastly, what we have is what I like to call the dice validator, which basically tells you what you have to work with in terms of your base dice. So, for example, if I do accuracy 1 for Z01, you see that Z01 has, when you're just calculating his base stats and you're not calculating into the bonus dice and the bonus powers, he has 6 dice and 1 mega dice for a brawl attack. That's what this accuracy is. It's based on brawl. And that's kind of it. That's how I created the entire combat system for this. And yes, there's more refinements that could be done. There's improvements that can be done here and there, but it gets the job done. Now, before we go, I will show you the last one, the list function. Because what the list function does is it basically goes into the database, and I manually set this thing up so it would pull up the name, the ID number, and their image. And I said, all right, we're going to throw all that up onto the screen. We set the background before. We resize the background. All that same stuff that we've been doing before. And all I did was say, store JSON from Web API. We're looking at, so here's an example of pulling the entire Web API. See, hero JSON file. Notice there's no JSON path because I want to pull everything. We're throwing everything into the supers temporary variable, and then we're just basically going through and saying, okay, draw text onto the image. Super 0, and the name and the image. Resize them, draw them. Supers 1, resize them, draw them. Supers 2, resize them, draw them. Supers 3, resize them, draw them. And it's just a complete manual, burst through the entire system. I'm just saying Supers 6, Super 7, Super 8. And then once I've got all those things, again, drawn onto the background, all you have to do is send image the background, and that gets you the final image. I don't care. And really, that's the long and the short of it, folks. I'm hoping that gave you some idea about image manipulation, JSON, image positioning, resizing, pulling stuff from JSON, and just some general overviews of how you can work with images in a JSON array in your Doscord Bot Maker. So with that said, I'll see you guys all in the future. And I hope you all had fun learning a little bit more about Doscord Bot Maker with